The radio crackled with static and fear. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat in the small communications room at Forward Operating Base Lightning, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. The voice on the other end was breaking up, but she could hear the panic clearly. "We need help. We're taking heavy fire. Multiple casualties. I repeat, we have multiple casualties." Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing. She had been flying medevac helicopters for 8 years, but something about this call felt different. The desperation in the soldier's voice cut through the usual military calm. "What's your location?" the radio operator asked. "Korengal Valley." "Grid coordinates." The voice dissolved into static, then came back. "They hit our convoy. We're scattered. Command, we need extraction now." Sarah looked at the large map on the wall. The Korengal Valley. Everyone called it the Valley of Death. The Taliban controlled most of the area. High mountains on both sides made it a perfect place for ambushes. Many soldiers had died there. The radio operator wrote down the coordinates. More calls started coming in. Different units, different voices, but all saying the same thing. They were trapped. They were under attack. They needed help. Sarah stood up and walked closer to the map. She traced her finger along the valley. It was deep in enemy territory, at least 40 minutes away by helicopter. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky orange and red. Night missions were always dangerous, but night missions into the Korengal were nearly suicide. Lieutenant James Park, her co-pilot, walked into the room. He had been her partner for 2 years. They had flown through sandstorms, dodged bullets, and saved hundreds of lives together. He looked at her face and knew something was wrong. "What's happening?" he asked. "Multiple units pinned down in the Korengal. Sounds like a coordinated attack. They hit a supply convoy and now everyone's scattered." James walked to the map. His jaw tightened. "How many soldiers?" "They're still counting. But from the radio calls, it sounds like a lot." More voices crackled through the radio. A medic reporting 20 wounded. A lieutenant saying his men were surrounded. A sergeant begging for air support. The communications room began filling with officers, everyone trying to understand the situation. Colonel Richards, the base commander, pushed through the door. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been in Afghanistan for 3 tours. Sarah respected him, but she also knew he played by the rules. Always. "Situation report," he demanded. The radio operator handed him a paper. "Sir, we have multiple units under attack in the Korengal Valley. Initial reports suggest the Taliban ambushed a supply convoy around 1600 hours. The convoy was carrying supplies for several forward positions. When they got hit, units from 3 different companies tried to help. Now they're all trapped." Colonel Richards studied the paper. His face grew dark. "How many?" "Still counting, sir. But early estimates say around 300 soldiers, maybe more." The room went silent. 300 soldiers. That was almost an entire battalion. All trapped in the most dangerous valley in Afghanistan. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 300 people. Sons, daughters, fathers, mothers. All waiting for help that might never come. The colonel looked at the map. "What about extraction? Can we get helicopters in there?" A weather officer spoke up. "Sir, we have a massive sandstorm moving in from the west. It'll hit the valley in about 3 hours. Visibility will be 0. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. What about going now before the storm hits?" "Sir, the sun sets in 40 minutes. We'd be flying in darkness, and the Taliban have the high ground. They'd shoot down any helicopter we send." Colonel Richards rubbed his face. Sarah could see him doing the math, weighing the options. Every commander's nightmare, soldiers in danger, no good choices. What about air support? "Can we bomb the Taliban positions?" "Too close to our guys, sir. We'd hit our own men." The radio continued its chorus of desperate voices. Sarah listened to each one. A young soldier crying for a medic. An officer trying to keep his men calm. A sergeant reporting that they were running out of ammunition. Colonel Richards made his decision. "Issue a stand-down order. All units are to dig in and defend their positions. We'll extract them when the weather clears." "Sir, that storm could last 12 hours or more," James said. "I know, Lieutenant, but I'm not sending helicopters into that valley at night during a sandstorm. That's a suicide mission." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "Sir, those soldiers won't last 12 hours. The wounded need medical attention now." "I understand that, Captain, but I won't sacrifice more lives on a mission that can't succeed. The order stands. Nobody flies tonight." The colonel left the room. The other officers followed, talking in low voices. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the map. 300 soldiers, left to die because it was too dangerous to save them. James touched her shoulder. He's right, Sarah, we can't fly in those conditions. It would be suicide. Maybe, she said quietly. The communications room slowly emptied. The radio operator stayed at his post, listening to the desperate calls. Sarah couldn't leave. She poured another cup of coffee and sat down. For the next 3 hours, she listened. She heard soldiers talking about their families. A 20-year-old from Texas who was supposed to get married in 2 months. A father of 3 from Ohio who showed everyone pictures of his kids. A 19-year-old who had joined the army to pay for college. She heard medics describing injuries. Gunshot wounds to the chest, legs blown off by mines, soldiers bleeding to death because there were no supplies to save them. She heard officers trying to organize defenses, moving men to better positions, rationing ammunition, making plans for a last stand if the Taliban attacked in force. Around midnight, the sandstorm hit. The wind howled outside the communications room. Sarah could hear sand blasting against the building. The radio calls became harder to hear. The storm was interfering with the signals. One voice came through clearly. It was a captain named Morrison. Sarah had met him once at a briefing. He was young, maybe 30, with a wife back home. "Command, this is Morrison. We have 42 wounded, 17 critical. They won't make it until morning. We need medevac now." The radio operator looked at Sarah. She could see the helplessness in his eyes. What could he say? That nobody was coming? That they were on their own? Copy that, Morrison. Hold position. Help is coming. It was a lie. A kind lie, but still a lie. Sarah stood up. She walked out of the communications room and headed toward the helicopter hangar. The wind nearly knocked her over. Sand stung her face. She pulled her jacket tighter and kept walking. The hangar was dark except for a few work lights. Her Black Hawk helicopter sat in the middle, looking like a sleeping giant. Sarah walked around it slowly, running her hand along the metal body. She had flown this bird for 3 years. She knew every sound it made, every quirk, every weakness. James found her there 20 minutes later. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood next to her looking at the helicopter. "You're thinking about it," he finally said. "Yeah. It's impossible, Sarah. The storm, the darkness, the Taliban. We wouldn't make it 5 miles. Maybe." Command ordered a stand down. "If you fly, they'll court-martial you. Your career will be over." Sarah turned to look at him. Her eyes were red from exhaustion and emotion. 300 people, James, 300. And we're just going to leave them there to die because it's too dangerous? It's not about danger. It's about impossible. You can't fly in 0 visibility through mountains you can't see. You'll crash before you even reach them. I've flown that valley 12 times. I know every ridge, every turn, in daylight, not in a sandstorm at night. Sarah looked back at the helicopter. She thought about all the soldiers she had saved over the years. The 19-year-old with the missing leg. The sergeant with the chest wound. The lieutenant who had stepped on a mine. She remembered their faces, their gratitude, their tears. She thought about the 300 soldiers in the valley. Their faces were different, but their fear was the same. They were waiting for someone to save them. They were hoping that someone would be brave enough to come. James watched her face. He had known her long enough to recognize that look. She had made her decision. "If you're going, you'll need a crew," he said quietly. "I can't ask you to risk your life." "You're not asking." "I'm volunteering." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We might all die out there." They walked to the crew quarters and woke up the rest of their team. Rodriguez, the medic, a quiet man from California who could work miracles with limited supplies. Chen and Williams, the door gunners, both tough soldiers who had seen too much combat. Sarah told them the situation. 300 soldiers trapped. A sandstorm. Direct orders not to fly. Possible court-martial. Probable death. "I'm going," she said. "I need to know if you're with me." Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "I'm in." Chen nodded. "Let's go save some people." Williams smiled. "Sounds like fun." At 0300 hours, Sarah Mitchell and her crew began their pre-flight checks. The sandstorm raged outside. The wind shook the hangar. Command had no idea what they were about to do. Sarah climbed into the pilot seat and put on her helmet. She looked at James in the co-pilot seat. He gave her a thumbs up. "Let's go bring them home," she said. The helicopter's engines roared to life. In a few minutes, they would take off into the storm. The helicopter shook violently as soon as they left the ground. Sand blasted against the windshield so hard that Sarah thought the glass might crack. She couldn't see anything. Not the ground, not the sky, nothing but brown chaos swirling around them. Altitude? She shouted over the noise. 50 feet, James replied, his eyes locked on the instruments. 60, 70. Sarah kept the helicopter low. Flying high in this storm would be suicide. The wind could flip them over. But flying low meant they could hit a mountain if they drifted off course. She had to trust her memory and her instruments. The radio exploded with angry voices. Command had discovered they were airborne. Black Hawk 7-2, this is base command. You are ordered to return immediately. Acknowledge. Sarah reached down and switched off the radio. She needed to focus. She couldn't listen to orders that would mean abandoning 300 soldiers. They're going to be really angry about that, James said. I know. The helicopter bucked and dropped suddenly. Sarah's stomach jumped into her throat. They had hit an air pocket. She pulled back on the controls, leveling them out. Behind her, she heard Rodriguez checking his medical supplies. Chen and Williams were at the door guns, though they couldn't see anything to shoot at. How long to the valley? Sarah asked. James checked the GPS. At this speed, 42 minutes. If we don't crash first, Sarah said nothing. She was counting in her head, remembering every landmark between the base and the Korangal Valley. There was a river at 15 minutes, a small village at 25 minutes, a mountain pass at 38 minutes. If she could navigate by memory and instruments, they might make it. The minutes crawled by. Every second felt like an hour. The helicopter shook and rattled. Sand got into everything. Sarah could taste it in her mouth. Her hands gripped the controls so tightly her knuckles turned white. At 17 minutes, James spoke. We should be crossing the river now. Sarah couldn't see it, but she felt the helicopter dip slightly. The air was different over water. She had flown this route enough times to feel it. Roger that, she said. At 26 minutes, the GPS showed they were passing the village. Sarah adjusted their course 3 degrees east. She was flying blind, but somehow she knew where they were. You're doing great, James said quietly. At 39 minutes, the mountains rose up around them. Sarah could sense them more than see them. The wind changed, bouncing off the rock faces. She climbed higher, giving them clearance over the pass. Then suddenly the radio crackled to life. She hadn't switched it off completely. Any call sign, this is Morrison. We need immediate medevac. We have men dying? Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help now. Sarah pressed the transmit button. Morrison, this is Black Hawk 7-2. We're 5 minutes out. There was silence on the other end. Then Morrison's voice came back, shaking with emotion. 7-2. Did you say you're 5 minutes out? In this storm? Affirmative. Get your wounded ready for transport. We can take 15 at a time. Copy that, 7-2. God bless you. God bless all of you, James was staring at her. 15 at a time? Sarah, do the math. 300 soldiers. That's 20 trips. 20 trips through this hell. Then we better get started. The Korangal Valley opened up below them. Sarah dropped altitude, looking for the coordinates Morrison had given them. The sandstorm was slightly less intense in the valley, but visibility was still terrible. She could barely make out shapes on the ground. I see lights, Williams called from the back. Ground strobes. 11 o'clock. Sarah turned the helicopter toward the lights. As they got closer, she could see soldiers on the ground waving frantically. Some were lying down wounded. Others were crouched behind rocks, rifles ready, taking fire. Chen shouted, "Tracers from the ridge!" Sarah saw them now. Red streaks in the darkness. The Taliban had spotted their landing lights. Bullets pinged off the helicopter's armor. Hold on, Sarah said. She dropped the helicopter fast, using a destroyed truck as cover. The landing was rough but controlled. The moment the wheels touched ground, Rodriguez jumped out with his medical bag. Soldiers rushed toward them, carrying wounded men. Sarah counted them as they loaded. 1, 2, 3. A soldier with his arm in a makeshift sling. 4, 5, 6. A man with blood covering his face. 7, 8, 9. Someone who wasn't moving at all. More bullets hit the helicopter. Chen and Williams returned fire, their machine guns roaring. The sound was deafening. 15 aboard, Rodriguez shouted. Go, go, go. Sarah pulled up on the controls. The helicopter strained under the extra weight but lifted off. More tracer rounds followed them into the sky. One hit the tail rotor, Sarah felt the helicopter shudder but stay airborne. Tail rotor damage, James reported. But we're still flying. The flight back to base was tense. Sarah flew as fast as she dared with the extra weight and damaged rotor. In the back, Rodriguez worked on the wounded. She could hear him talking to them, keeping them calm, stopping bleeding, saving lives. 37 minutes later, they landed at base. Medical teams rushed to the helicopter. They pulled out the wounded and carried them to the hospital. Sarah didn't wait. As soon as the last soldier was off, she started the engines again. Colonel Richards ran onto the landing pad, waving his arms. Sarah ignored him. She lifted off before he could stop her. "Second run," she said to her crew. "Everyone okay?" "Good to go," James said. "Ready," Rodriguez confirmed. "Let's do this," Chen and William said together. The second trip was harder. The storm had gotten worse. The Taliban knew they were coming now. But Sarah flew back into the valley, landed under fire, and loaded 15 more soldiers. Then she flew back to base. Third trip, fourth trip, fifth trip. Each time they landed, Morrison's men were ready. They had the wounded organized, most critical cases first. They loaded quickly and efficiently, but each time Sarah saw more injuries. Burns from explosions, limbs blown off by mines, chest wounds from bullets. On the sixth trip, as they were loading, a Taliban fighter got close enough to throw a grenade. It exploded near the helicopter. Shrapnel tore through the metal skin. One piece hit Williams in the shoulder. "I'm okay," he shouted, blood running down his arm. "Keep going." Sarah looked back. Williams was still at his gun, still firing, blood soaking his uniform. She wanted to take him back to get medical attention, but he shook his head. "These guys need the space more than I do," he said. "I can wait." Seventh trip. Eighth trip. Ninth trip. The helicopter was falling apart. Warning lights blinked on the dashboard. The tail rotor was barely holding together. The fuel tank had a small leak that they patched with emergency sealant. The hydraulics were making strange noises. On the 10th trip, James spoke quietly. "Sarah, the bird's dying. We might not make it much longer." "How many more trips?" "At 15 per load, we've taken 135. That leaves 165. 11 more trips, then. The helicopter won't last 11 more trips. It has to." When they landed back at base after the 10th trip, a maintenance crew was waiting. The crew chief, a sergeant named Martinez, ran to the helicopter. "Captain, this bird is done. You need to ground it. Can you fix it? In about 3 days, maybe. But not in 10 minutes. Do what you can in 10 minutes. Martinez looked at the damaged helicopter, then at Sarah's determined face. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." While the wounded were being unloaded, Martinez and his team worked frantically. They patched holes with metal plates. They topped off the fuel. They did what they could with the hydraulics. It wasn't perfect, but it might buy them a few more trips. Sarah used the 10 minutes to drink water and eat a protein bar. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion. She had been flying for 6 hours straight. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. But she couldn't stop. Not while soldiers were still trapped in that valley. James pulled her aside. "Sarah, you need rest. Let another crew take over." "There is no other crew. Every other pilot is grounded by command. We're the only ones flying, because we're the only ones crazy enough to disobey orders." Sarah smiled tiredly. "Yeah, that's probably true. 11th trip. 12th trip. 13th trip. On the 14th trip, the hydraulics started failing. Sarah could feel it in the controls. The helicopter was responding slowly. It felt heavy and sluggish. "Hydraulics at 30%, James reported. 25%. 20%, we can still fly, barely." They landed in the valley. More wounded soldiers climbed aboard. Sarah counted them. 13, 14, 15. But before she could take off, Morrison ran to her window. "Captain, there's a group of soldiers trapped half a mile north. 20 men. The Taliban has them surrounded. They won't last another hour." Sarah looked at her instruments. The hydraulics were at 15%. The fuel was low. The tail rotor was barely attached. Going to rescue another group meant more time in the valley, more exposure to enemy fire. "Send me the coordinates," she said. Morrison looked at her like she was an angel. "Thank you, Captain." "Thank you." Sarah flew north, fighting the dying helicopter every second. The hydraulics dropped to 10%. The controls felt like they were made of concrete. It took all her strength to turn the helicopter. They found the trapped soldiers exactly where Morrison said they would be. They were in a dried riverbed, surrounded on three sides by Taliban fighters. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from all directions. "This is going to be ugly," James said. Sarah stood in Colonel Richards' office, still wearing her flight suit covered in blood and sand. William stood beside her, his shoulder bandaged but his back straight. Rodriguez, Chen, and James stood behind them. They were all under arrest. The colonel sat at his desk, his face red with anger. 3 MP officers stood by the door. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" the colonel shouted. "You disobeyed a direct order. You stole military property. You endangered your crew. We saved 210 soldiers," Sarah interrupted. "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point, sir. 210 people are alive because we flew into that valley. They're alive because someone decided to help them. You destroyed a helicopter worth $30 million. I'd destroy 100 helicopters if it meant saving lives." The colonel stood up, his fists clenched. "You're done, Mitchell. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge. Probably prison time. Your career is over." Sarah met his eyes without fear. "I understand, sir. But 90 soldiers are still trapped in that valley. They need help. So if you're going to court-martial me, fine. But do it after we bring the rest of them home. Nobody else is flying into that valley tonight. I've grounded all aircraft. Then people are going to die, sir. And that's on you." The colonel's face turned purple. He looked ready to explode. But before he could speak, someone knocked on the door. "Not now," the colonel yelled. The door opened anyway. Major Patricia Simmons walked in. She was the base intelligence officer, a sharp woman who had served in 3 wars. She carried a laptop. "Colonel, you need to see this," she said. "Major, I'm in the middle of—" "Sir, the soldiers Captain Mitchell rescued have been talking to their units. Word is spreading through the entire theater. Every base in Afghanistan knows what happened tonight." She opened the laptop and turned it around. On the screen was a video call. Dozens of faces filled the screen. Officers from different bases all watching. "Sir," one of them said, "we're hearing that you've grounded all rescue operations. Is that true?" "Yes," the colonel said stiffly. "Weather conditions make flight operations impossible." "Sir, with respect, Captain Mitchell just flew 14 missions in those impossible conditions. She proved it can be done." Another officer spoke up. "Colonel, those 90 soldiers still trapped include men from my unit. If there's any chance of rescue, we need to take it." More voices joined in. Officers from across Afghanistan all demanding action. The colonel looked at the screen, then at Sarah, then back at the screen. Major Simmons spoke quietly. "Sir, if we abandon those soldiers now, after what Captain Mitchell has proven is possible, the entire military will know. This could become a scandal." The colonel closed his eyes. Sarah could see him struggling with the decision. Rules versus results, protocol versus lives. Finally he spoke. "Captain Mitchell, you and your crew are confined to quarters pending court-martial proceedings." He paused. "However, we need qualified helicopter crews for the remaining rescue operation. Major Simmons, find me pilots and aircraft." "Sir," Sarah said. "With respect, no one knows that valley like I do. No one else has flown it at night in a storm. If you send inexperienced pilots, they'll crash. You crashed, Captain. But we all walked away, and we saved 210 people first." The colonel stared at her for a long moment. The laptop screen showed dozens of officers waiting for his decision. "Release them," he finally said to the MPs. "Captain Mitchell, you have 6 hours to complete the rescue operation. After that, you're under arrest again." "Understood?" "Yes, sir. And Mitchell, if you crash another of my helicopters, I'm billing you for it." Sarah almost smiled. "Understood, sir." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in front of a new Black Hawk helicopter. Maintenance crews swarmed over it doing final checks. This bird was newer than her old one, with better systems and stronger armor. Martinez, the crew chief, briefed her on the aircraft. "She's got full fuel, fresh ammunition, and I've reinforced the critical systems. But Captain, even this bird won't last forever. You need to be careful. I'll do my best. Also, you've got company." Martinez pointed to 2 Apache attack helicopters nearby. "Colonel Richards authorized gunship support. They'll provide cover while you extract the soldiers." Sarah nodded. Apaches were powerful attack helicopters designed to destroy enemy targets. With them providing cover, the Taliban would have a much harder time shooting at her. James climbed into the co-pilot seat. "Ready for round 2? "Always." Rodriguez, Chen, and Williams loaded up in the back. Williams' shoulder was properly bandaged now, but he refused to sit this out. You should rest, Sarah told him. I'll rest when everyone's home, he replied. The two Apache pilots radioed in. Black Hawk 7-2, this is Apache 1-3 and 1-4. We're your guardian angels tonight. Copy that, Apache 1-3. Let's go get our people. They lifted off into the storm. The weather had improved slightly. The sandstorm was dying down, but visibility was still poor. The Apaches flanked them, their weapons ready. The flight to the valley took 35 minutes. When they arrived, Sarah could see fires burning on the ground. The Taliban had attacked again while she was gone. Explosions lit up the darkness. Morrison, this is 7-2. We're back. What's your situation? 7-2, thank God. We've got 70 wounded and 20 walking wounded. The Taliban launched a major assault an hour ago. We held them off, but barely. We need to move fast. Copy that. Apache 1-3, do you see enemy positions? Affirmative, 7-2. We count approximately 50 Taliban fighters on the ridgeline. They've got us in their sights. Can you suppress them? With pleasure. The two Apache helicopters swooped down like angry hornets. Their cannons roared, firing 30-millimeter rounds at the Taliban positions. Explosions rippled across the ridgeline. The enemy fire slackened. Sarah landed in the valley. Morrison's soldiers had organized the wounded into groups of 15, prioritizing the most critical cases. They loaded the first group quickly and efficiently. Go, Morrison shouted. Sarah lifted off. The flight back to base was routine now. She knew every turn, every altitude change. Land, unload, refuel, repeat. Trip 16, trip 17, trip 18. On the 19th trip, the Apaches ran out of ammunition. 7-2, this is Apache 1-3. We're Winchester. We need to return to base for rearm and refuel. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Without the Apaches, the Taliban would concentrate all their fire on her helicopter. Copy that, 1-3. How long for rearm? 30 minutes minimum, 30 minutes. That meant at least 2 trips without air support. She looked at James. Your call, he said. Sarah thought about the soldiers still waiting in the valley, the wounded who were running out of time, the scared kids who just wanted to go home. We keep flying, she said. I was hoping you'd say that. Trip 19 without air support was terrifying. The moment Sarah landed, bullets hammered the helicopter from all sides. Chen and Williams returned fire, burning through ammunition fast. Soldiers loaded the wounded while Rodriguez worked to keep them alive. Taking heavy fire, Chen shouted. They're everywhere. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past the helicopter, missing by inches. Another exploded near the tail rotor. Sarah felt the helicopter shudder. Tail rotor damage, James reported. But we're still airborne. They loaded 18 soldiers, more than they should carry. Sarah didn't care about capacity limits anymore. She just wanted to get everyone out. She pulled up hard, bullets chasing them into the sky. The damaged tail rotor made the helicopter wobble, but they stayed flying. They made it back to base, unloaded, and immediately turned around. Trip 20 was worse. The Taliban had figured out where they were landing. They moved fighters closer, setting up a kill zone. When Sarah descended, it felt like every Taliban fighter in Afghanistan was shooting at them. RPG. RPG, Williams screamed. Sarah saw it coming. A rocket-propelled grenade trailing smoke heading right for them. She jerked the helicopter sideways. The RPG passed through the space where they had been a second before, but the movement threw off her landing. The helicopter hit hard, bouncing on the landing gear. Soldiers rushed to load the wounded anyway. Hurry, Morrison shouted. They're about to overrun us. Sarah looked out and saw Taliban fighters running down the hillside, trying to reach the helicopter before it took off. Chen and Williams fired continuously. Empty shell casings piled up on the floor. 15 aboard, Rodriguez yelled. Sarah didn't wait. She pulled up while Rodriguez was still pulling the last soldier inside. They climbed fast, bullets punching holes in the metal skin. One hit the fuel tank. Sarah could smell aviation fuel leaking. We're losing fuel, James said. A lot of fuel. Can we make it back to base? James did quick calculations. Maybe. If we fly low and fast. They flew just above the ground, the helicopter leaking fuel the whole way. The engine temperature climbed. More warning lights appeared on the dashboard. Sarah kept her eyes locked forward, willing the helicopter to keep flying. They made it back to base with the fuel gauge reading empty. As they landed, the engines coughed and died. They had used every drop of fuel. Martinez ran to the helicopter with his crew. They started emergency repairs while Sarah talked to the Apaches. 1-3, what's your status? Just finished rearming, 7-2. We're lifting off now. We'll meet you at the valley. Sarah woke up in a hospital bed 12 hours later. Every muscle in her body ached. Her hands were bandaged from gripping the controls so tightly for so long. Her ears were still ringing from the noise of the helicopters and gunfire. A nurse came in when she saw Sarah was awake. "How are you feeling, Captain?" "Like I crashed 2 helicopters in one night." The nurse smiled. "You're a celebrity, you know. Everyone's talking about what you did." "Where's my crew?" "They're all fine. Williams needed surgery on his shoulder, but he'll recover. The others are resting. You all need it." Sarah tried to sit up, but pain shot through her back. The nurse gently pushed her back down. "You need to rest, Captain. Doctor's orders. I need to see my crew. I need to know they're okay. They're fine. I promise. Now rest." But Sarah couldn't rest. She kept thinking about the rescue, about the soldiers they saved, about the 2 helicopters she destroyed, about the court-martial that was waiting for her. Around noon, James came to visit. His arm was in a sling, and he had bandages on his face where glass from the windshield had cut him. "You look terrible," Sarah said. "You should see yourself," James replied with a smile. He sat down carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Like I made the right decision, but now I have to pay for it." "Sarah, do you regret it?" She thought about that question. Did she regret disobeying orders? Destroying 2 helicopters? Risking her crew's lives? "No," she finally said. 340 people are alive. That matters more than anything else," James nodded. "The base is crazy right now. News crews are trying to get in. Generals are flying in from everywhere. And the soldiers you rescued, they're organizing something." "Organizing what?" "I don't know. But Morrison has been talking to all of them. They're planning something." 2 days later, Sarah was released from the hospital. She was immediately taken to Colonel Richard's office. This time the room was full of people. Several generals sat around the table. A legal officer stood in the corner with a thick file of papers. Major Simmons was there, along with several other officers Sarah didn't recognize. Colonel Richard stood when she entered. "Captain Mitchell, thank you for coming. Please sit down." Sarah sat, her back straight despite the pain. She had put on her dress uniform. If she was going to be court-martialed, she would face it with dignity. One of the generals spoke first. He was an older man with silver hair and rows of medals on his chest. "Captain Mitchell, I'm General Harrison from Central Command. I've reviewed the reports of your actions 2 nights ago. 23 missions into a hot zone during a sandstorm. 340 soldiers rescued. 2 helicopters destroyed. Approximately 47 violations of military protocol and direct orders." Sarah said nothing. There was nothing to say. It was all true. "You understand that your actions warrant a court-martial?" "Yes, sir." "You also understand that you could face prison time?" "Yes, sir." The general looked at the other officers in the room. Then he looked back at Sarah. "Captain, before we proceed, there's something you need to see." Major Simmons opened her laptop and turned it toward Sarah. On the screen was a video. It showed a huge crowd of soldiers gathered at the base airfield. Sarah recognized many of them. They were the soldiers she had rescued. Morrison stood in front of the crowd, speaking into a camera. 2 nights ago, Captain Sarah Mitchell saved my life and the lives of 339 other soldiers. She flew into hell repeatedly to bring us home. She disobeyed orders because following orders would have meant leaving us to die. She risked everything to save us." The camera panned across the crowd. Soldiers held signs that said, "Thank you, Captain Mitchell, and she saved us." Some were crying. Some saluted. Some just stood silently, witnesses to the truth. Morrison continued. "The military is considering court-martialing Captain Mitchell for her actions. We're here to say that if they punish her, they're punishing the wrong person. She's a hero. She did what was right when everyone else said it was impossible." The video ended. Major Simmons showed Sarah another video. Then another. Soldiers from all over Afghanistan were making statements supporting her. Families of rescued soldiers were calling their congressmen. News organizations were running stories about the rescue. General Harrison spoke again. "Captain Mitchell, your story has become public. The entire world knows what you did. The military has received thousands of letters, emails, and calls supporting you. Several members of Congress have demanded that you be honored, not punished." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had expected to be alone in this. She had expected everyone to focus on the rules she broke, not the lives she saved. "However," the general continued, "you did violate direct orders. You did destroy military property. These are serious offenses that we cannot simply ignore. I understand, sir. Do you? Do you understand that if we excuse your actions, we set a precedent? Every soldier could claim they had a good reason to disobey orders. Military discipline would collapse. Sarah looked the general in the eyes. With respect, sir, I don't think every situation is the same. I'm not asking for everyone to be allowed to disobey orders whenever they want. But in this specific situation, at that specific moment, following orders meant letting 340 people die. I couldn't live with that. I can live with being punished for saving them. The room was silent. Finally, Colonel Richards spoke. General, if I may. The general nodded. The colonel stood up and walked around his desk. Captain Mitchell, I was angry when you took that helicopter. I thought you were reckless and stupid. I thought you'd get yourself killed and your crew with you. But I was wrong. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. You saw a situation where people needed help and you provided it. You didn't wait for permission. You didn't wait for perfect conditions. You just acted. That's what soldiers are supposed to do. That's what leaders are supposed to do. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes but blinked them back. General Harrison spoke again. Captain Mitchell, we've decided not to proceed with a court-martial. Your actions, while technically violations of protocol, were done with the clear intent of saving lives. You succeeded in that mission without losing a single soldier or crew member. That cannot be ignored. Sarah's heart jumped. Thank you, sir. However, the general continued, you will receive a formal reprimand in your file. You will also be responsible for explaining to every pilot in Afghanistan why what you did was unique to those circumstances and not a blueprint for ignoring orders. I understand, sir. Furthermore, you're being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. The paperwork is already in process. Sarah was stunned. A medal? They were giving her a medal for disobeying orders? General Harrison smiled slightly. The military is a strange institution, Captain. We value following orders, but we value saving lives more. What you did was impossible according to every regulation and every safety protocol, but you did it anyway and everyone lived. That's worth recognizing. The meeting ended shortly after. As Sarah walked out of the office, she felt like she was floating. No court-martial. A reprimand, but also a medal. It was more than she had hoped for. Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, and James were waiting outside. They had all been listening somehow, probably through an open door or radio. We're not going to prison, Chen shouted, hugging Sarah. Williams, his arm still in a sling, grinned. I told you we'd be fine. You told me we'd probably die, James said. But we didn't, so I was right about being fine. They all laughed. Sarah felt the tension of the last 3 days finally releasing. Her crew was safe. The soldiers they rescued were alive. Everything had worked out. But as they walked toward the cafeteria to celebrate, Sarah heard her name being called. She turned to see Morrison running toward her, along with about 50 other soldiers. Morrison stopped in front of her, slightly out of breath. Captain Mitchell, we heard about the meeting. We're glad you're not being court-martialed. Thank you, Morrison. I'm glad too. We wanted to do something for you, for all of you. He gestured to Sarah's crew. You saved our lives. Some of us were wounded. Some of us wouldn't have lasted another hour. You came for us when everyone else said it was impossible. Morrison pulled something from his pocket. It was a patch, the kind soldiers sewed onto their uniforms. This one showed a black helicopter with angel wings and the words, the Angel of Korengal. Every soldier you rescued is wearing this patch now, Morrison said. 340 of us. We want you to have the first one. Sarah took the patch, her hand shaking. She looked at all the faces around her. These were people she had pulled out of hell. People who were alive because she made a choice, thank you, she whispered. All of you, thank you. More soldiers came forward, all wearing the patch. They shook her hand, hugged her, thanked her. Some were crying. Some were laughing. All of them were alive. That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, looking at the patch. The Angel of Korengal. She didn't feel like an angel. She felt like someone who did what needed to be done. But maybe that was what angels were. Not perfect beings without fear or doubt. Just regular people who saw others in trouble and decided to help no matter the cost. She thought about the 2 helicopters she had destroyed. $60 million of equipment, now scrap metal. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of 200 pilot trainees at Fort Rucker, Alabama. The classroom was quiet, every student focused on her. She was teaching a course called Advanced Emergency Operations. Today's lesson was about decision-making under pressure. Here's a situation, Sarah began. You receive orders to stand down due to bad weather, but you know soldiers are trapped and dying. What do? A young trainee raised her hand. Ma'am, we follow orders. That's what we're trained to do. That's the right answer according to the rule book, Sarah said. But what if following orders means people die? The classroom buzzed with discussion. Sarah let them talk for a moment, then raised her hand for silence. I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you may have heard it before. She told them about the night in the Korangal Valley, about the 340 soldiers trapped in the storm, about the decision to fly when everyone said it was impossible. She showed them videos from the rescue, footage from helmet cameras showing the landings under fire. The students watched in amazed silence. When the videos ended, Sarah asked them, "So what do you think? Did I make the right choice?" A male trainee spoke up. "Ma'am, you saved 340 lives. Of course you made the right choice. But I also violated direct orders. I destroyed 2 helicopters worth $60 million. I risked my crew's lives. If things had gone differently, if we had crashed on the first trip, everyone might have died. Would it still have been the right choice then?" The classroom went quiet. Sarah could see them struggling with the question. There was no easy answer. "Here's what I learned that night," Sarah continued. "Rules and orders exist for good reasons. They keep us safe. They maintain discipline. They prevent chaos. Most of the time you should follow them, but there are rare moments when you have to look beyond the rules and make a choice based on what's right. Those moments are scary because there's no guarantee you'll succeed. You might fail. You might make things worse. But sometimes you have to try anyway." A trainee raised his hand. "But how do you know when it's one of those moments?" Sarah smiled. "That's the hard part. You don't always know. But you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to live with? Can I live with breaking rules? Yes, if it saves lives. Can I live with following orders that lead to people dying? For me, the answer was no. But everyone has to make that choice for themselves." After class, several students stayed to ask questions. They wanted to know about the flying techniques she used, the decisions she made, the fear she felt. Sarah answered honestly. She didn't pretend to be a hero without doubts or fears. She was just someone who made a hard choice and got lucky that it worked out. As the students left, Major Patricia Simmons walked in. She had transferred to Fort Rucker as well, working in the training division. "Good class," Patricia said. "You're really connecting with these kids. I just want them to understand that being a good pilot isn't just about flying skill. It's about judgment and courage. Speaking of courage, there's something you should know. The award ceremony for your Distinguished Flying Cross is scheduled for next week, and it's going to be big." "Really big," Sarah groaned. "Can't they just mail me the medal?" Patricia laughed. "Not a chance. The Secretary of Defense is presenting it personally. It's going to be a major event. I hate ceremonies, I know, but the military wants to recognize what you did. And honestly, those 340 soldiers deserve to see you honored. Many of them are coming." Sarah's attitude changed immediately. "They're coming here?" "About 200 of them. The ones who are stateside or can get leave. They want to be there when you receive the medal." The thought of seeing those soldiers again filled Sarah with emotion. She hadn't talked to most of them since leaving Afghanistan. She wondered how they were doing, if their wounds had healed, if they were okay. "Okay," she said. "I'll do the ceremony." For them, the week passed quickly. Sarah continued teaching, but she thought constantly about the upcoming ceremony. She practiced her speech, though she wasn't good at formal speaking. She just wanted to thank the soldiers for their service and acknowledge her crew. The morning of the ceremony, Sarah put on her dress uniform. The Angel of Korangal patch was sewn over her heart. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She had changed since that night. She was more confident, but also more aware of how fragile life could be. James, Rodriguez, Chen, and Williams met her at the ceremony hall. They were all receiving medals too, though not as high as Sarah's. They had also been formally cleared of any wrongdoing. "Ready for this?" James asked. "Not even a little bit," Sarah admitted. The ceremony hall was packed. Hundreds of people filled the seats. Sarah saw generals, politicians, news cameras, and families. But most importantly, she saw soldiers. Rows and rows of soldiers, all wearing the Angel of Korangal patch. As Sarah walked to her seat on the stage, the soldiers stood and applauded. The applause grew louder and louder until the entire hall was standing, clapping, some people crying. Sarah felt overwhelmed. She had to blink back tears. The ceremony began with speeches. Generals talked about courage and sacrifice. Politicians praised military service. But Sarah barely heard any of it. She kept looking at the soldiers in the audience, remembering their faces from that night. Finally, it was time for the award presentation. The Secretary of Defense, a distinguished woman named Margaret Price, stepped to the podium. Today we honor Captain Sarah Mitchell for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. On the night of November 12th, Captain Mitchell flew 23 missions into enemy territory during a severe sandstorm. Despite direct orders to stand down, despite mechanical failures, despite heavy enemy fire, she continued flying until all 340 trapped soldiers were rescued. Secretary Price paused, looking at Sarah. Captain Mitchell's actions that night represent the best of military service. She saw soldiers in danger and refused to abandon them. She risked everything to bring them home. Her courage, skill, and determination saved hundreds of lives. The secretary picked up a medal from a velvet box. It was the Distinguished Flying Cross, a bronze cross with a propeller in the center. Sarah stepped forward. As Secretary Price pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform, she whispered, "Thank you for reminding us what service really means." Sarah saluted, then turned to face the audience. The applause was deafening. Soldiers stood and saluted. Families wiped away tears. Camera flashes lit up the room. Secretary Price handed the microphone to Sarah. Time for her speech. Sarah's hands shook as she held the microphone. "Thank you," she began, her voice quiet. "I'm honored to receive this medal. But I need to be clear about something. I didn't do this alone." She gestured to her crew. Lieutenant James Park, Sergeant Rodriguez, Specialist Chen, and Specialist Williams. They flew with me into that storm. They faced the same dangers. They made the same sacrifices. Without them, I couldn't have saved anyone. The 4 crew members stood and the audience applauded them. Sarah continued, "I also want to acknowledge someone who isn't here. Sergeant Martinez, the crew chief who kept our helicopters flying. He worked miracles that night, patching holes and refueling in minutes. He's back in Afghanistan now, still saving lives by keeping helicopters in the air." More applause. Sarah took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "A lot of people have called me a hero. I appreciate that, but it's not accurate. Heroes are people who do extraordinary things. What I did was ordinary. I saw people who needed help and I helped them. That's what any decent person would do." She looked at the soldiers in the audience. "You are the heroes. You served in a dangerous place far from home. You faced enemy fire. You got wounded but kept fighting. You took care of each other. That's heroic. All I did was fly a helicopter." Morrison stood up from the audience. "Ma'am, if I may?" Sarah nodded. Morrison walked to the front. He looked different than he had in Afghanistan. His wounds had healed. He had gained back the weight he lost. But his eyes still held the memory of that night. "Captain Mitchell, you say you just flew a helicopter, but I was there. I watched you land in conditions that should have been impossible. I watched you come back trip after trip even when your helicopter was falling apart. I watched you risk everything for us." His voice broke slightly. "Some of us wouldn't have lasted another hour. We were wounded, surrounded, running out of ammunition. We thought we were going to die. Then we heard your helicopter coming through the storm, and we knew someone hadn't given up on us. That's more than just flying a helicopter, ma'am. That's refusing to leave people behind." Other soldiers stood up, adding their voices. A young woman talked about how Sarah pulled her out minutes before her position was overrun. A man described watching Sarah land under heavy fire to save his unit. A father thanked Sarah for bringing his son home. Sarah listened to each story, tears running down her face. She hadn't fully understood the impact of that night. She had focused on the technical aspects, the flying, the decisions, the risks. But for these soldiers, it was about something more. It was about hope, about knowing someone cared enough to come for them. When the soldiers finished speaking, Sarah stepped back to the microphone. She had planned a short speech, but now she spoke from her heart.